The Kremlin has already publicly demanded 3 times this week that Ukraine surrender Donbas in order to quickly end the war. But at the same time, the Financial Times reports today that Vladimir Putin does not intend to stop at Donbas. His real ambitions are much broader, and he is in a hurry to lock in only an interim outcome. And it's important to note here that even Donald Trump has already stated that he does not agree that Ukraine should give Donbas to Russia. Meanwhile, insiders have said that Vladimir Putin is confident that his army will somehow capture the entire Donbas by autumn. I'm Aleksei Pechiy, let's discuss this topic. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, like this episode, and leave any comment below this video. This really helps a lot with promoting the content on YouTube, and I'd be grateful for that. And also, subscribe to my Telegram channel. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, the Kremlin has already stated for the 3rd time this week that Ukraine must withdraw its troops from the entire territory of Donbas for a ceasefire and continue negotiations for a peaceful settlement. Today, Putin's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that Zelensky must order the armed forces of Ukraine to cease fire and leave the territory of Donbas, and supposedly, negotiations for peace will begin immediately after that. I would like to note that on Sunday, Putin's aide Yuri Ushakov made a similar statement. According to him, as long as the Ukrainian armed forces are not withdrawn from Donbas, dozens of rounds of negotiations can be held, but they will be meaningless. 3 days before that, he stated that continuing trilateral negotiations in the US-Ukraine-Russia format would only make sense when Kiev withdraws its troops from Donbas. At the same time, even if Ukraine surrenders the remaining part of Donbas without a fight, further negotiations, quote, will inevitably be very difficult and will contain a large number of important details. So, on the one hand, they say surrender Donbas and negotiations will begin, but on the other hand, these negotiations will go on forever. And against this backdrop, the Financial Times writes today that the top military command has convinced the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, that Russian troops will be able to capture all of Donbas by autumn. According to sources close to the Kremlin and Ukrainian intelligence, the Russian military leadership convinced Putin that control over Donbas can be fully secured by autumn, saying that Ukraine definitely won't be able to defend these territories. As Putin's military assures him, by September or October, they can reach the administrative borders of Donetsk region. But here comes the most important part. As the Financial Times writes, citing its sources, the Kremlin has already decided that after establishing control over Donbas, Vladimir Putin intends to raise his demands for a ceasefire and may expand territorial claims. The deputy head of Ukrainian military intelligence, Vadim Skibitsky, stated that success in Donbas would allow the Kremlin to make additional demands. According to him, Putin may then demand the transfer of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions, which Russia illegally declared part of Russia in 2022. A significant part of them remains under Ukrainian control, but that's not the limit. Vladimir Putin made toughened territorial demands on Ukraine after the complete occupation of Donetsk region. The ultimate ambitions of the Russian dictator include control over territory at least up to the Dnipro River, as well as Kyiv and Odessa. That is, a scenario that was not publicly discussed as realistic now sounds like this. Putin wants everything up to the banks of the Dnipro, plus Kyiv, plus Odessa. As a result, Ukrainian officials admit that the Americans have made no progress with Russia. Everything that could have been agreed upon has already been done, so the negotiations really make no sense. The talks actually stopped after the last round in February. Financial Times sources indicate that Ukrainian authorities consider their position less vulnerable to pressure from Washington. After stabilizing the situation at the front and gaining the ability to strike deep into Russian territory. And Moscow is still focused on victory at the front, pursuing maximalist goals, and its actions do not indicate readiness for real negotiations. And what do we have as a result? On the one hand, the Financial Times writes that Vladimir Putin personally blocks any options for freezing the conflict along the current front line. On the other hand, the Kremlin publicly demands that Ukraine first withdraw from Donbas, and only then will negotiations begin. So, negotiations are only possible on the condition of capitulation. Excuse me, but that's not a negotiating position, that's a demand to acknowledge defeat. What does this mean for Donald Trump, who is now in Beijing? He went there with a peace agenda regarding Ukraine. He wants to show that he is supposedly making progress. But the Financial Times says that neither the Russian nor the Ukrainian side believes Trump can mediate. That's all. Neither side expects the resumption of substantial peace talks mediated by the US even after the end of the war in the Middle East. So for the past 2 months, they've been saying that Trump is just busy with another issue. But now all sides are saying that even after the war with Iran, it's unlikely that Trump will help in any way. Trump flew to Beijing to ask Xi Jinping for help with Iran, and at the same time he might also bring up the issue of Ukraine. But as long as Vladimir Putin believes he will take all of Donbas by the fall, he has no incentive whatsoever to compromise. So the logic is simple. Why make a deal today if you can get more by the fall? But finally, there's at least some kind of opening here. The President of the United States, speaking to the press the day before, answered negatively when asked if there was an agreement between him and President Vladimir Putin of Russia that all of Donbas should go to Russia. Well, let's see how Trump will act next. But so far, his mediation really hasn't led to peace. Although he once again stated the day before that the war in Ukraine will end very soon. I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so financially with any donation or a paid channel membership using the links and details in the description of this video or by scanning the QR code on your screens. Thank you for any support. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.